Hello and welcome to City Focus. I'm Diane Gonzalez. The City of Lincoln wants your input on next year's budget. The Taking Charge survey is now available on the city website at lincoln.ne.gov, and we're looking for residents to take part in an in-depth discussion on the city budget on Saturday, May 16th. We're honored to be joined today by Mayor Chris Beitler. Thank you very much for being here. And also by Alan Tompkins. He's the director of the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center, which is working with the city on the effort. Thank you both for being here today. Talk about a very complex subject. Mayor, you're now preparing the city budget for the 2009-2010 fiscal year. What's the outlook at this point?
Well, I'm sad to report that the outlook's not good. We've had a couple of rough budget years already. In the last 2 years, we've had to cut 115 jobs because of sales tax revenues primarily that were not increasing. And as most folks know, sales tax revenues are our largest source of revenue. And now, this year, not only are sales taxes not growing rapidly, they're not growing at all. Right now, our total sales tax collections are running below what they were last year. And in addition to that, for the first time, our overall property tax valuation will be lower than last year, which means that our property taxes, our second most important source of revenue, will also be in decline. So it's a serious situation. The year ahead of us will involve some expenditure cuts.
Well, our expenditures just keep going up, right? Our expenses go up and revenue stays flat, and that's a recipe for trouble.
Well, it is. As you know, there's always some inflation. Inflation is low right now, but that increased the costs that you get for every dollar, or it decreases the value of what you get for every dollar of revenue. Then in addition, of course, most of our costs are personnel costs, and personnel wages and benefits are controlled by the Commission on Industrial Relations, which dictates that we increase wages and benefits in accordance with a formula that involves looking at comparable cities in our area. And this time around, that formula will require us to increase salaries and benefits by probably someplace in the neighborhood of 2%.
Well, what are you trying to accomplish with the survey then, in terms of direction for the city budget?
Well, we want to know what the public thinks. After all, this is a democracy, and to the extent that we can understand what the public is feeling with regard to some of the choices that will be in front of us, we want that information. For the last 2 years, we've worked with Alan at the university to involve the public increasingly in the budget discussion, and to try to get them to generate a community discussion about what choices they would like to see us make. And so to that end, we've worked with Alan to devise a 20-minute online survey, for example, that we hope citizens will fill out, composed of questions that are very relevant to the decisions that we will be making on next year's budget, and asking them how they would make those particular decisions, so that we're not giving up our duty to make the tough decisions, but we're trying to inform ourselves, inform the City Council, inform myself on what the public wants us to do in some of these difficult situations.
All right. Alan, again, you're with the Public Policy Center at the university. What has your role been in working with the city on the budget process?
Well, it actually started through our interest in public participation and providing policymakers with input from key stakeholders in the general public. So we've been doing this for several years, a lot of activity with PBS and their By the People initiative. So there, increasingly across cities in the United States, there's an interest in involving the public, like Mayor Beitler was talking about. So this is actually not unique to Lincoln. There are activities in terms of budgeting, there are activities in terms of public input activities, in terms of the performance measures that community use to evaluate governmental performance. And so in many dimensions of government operations, for example, I just came back from Williamsburg, Virginia, where this is being, the National Center for State Courts, a national group, is working with courts around the United States to get public input about what should court operations look like. It's the same thing that the mayor just said. They're not looking for input on a case-specific decision. They're saying, what ways can we engage as a branch of the public with the public?
Mm-hmm. Now, last year we did the Priority Lincoln process. It was a broader goal setting, looking at priorities and outcomes and that kind of thing. This year is a little more specific, right?
Yes, yeah. Actually, what we're doing this year is taking the information that we acquired last year, in which the different program priorities were, we surveyed the community about those priorities. Then I think you've been using that information strategically, and I know we were surprised that things like economic investments for the public, right, for the government, was something that I hadn't expected to be as high. I think we all expected safety and security. Now what the survey is doing is asking more of micro questions where the mayor, the department heads, and other people in the city government have been saying, okay, we know what the priorities are. Not going to ask the public to give input about that, but we have some secondary and tertiary priorities. Unfortunately, some of these, we're not going to be able to fund all these activities. And so working with the mayor and others in the city, then questions were developed to say, in this area, if the health department, should we be doing this or should we be doing that? With the libraries, should we be, for example, only focusing on the quadrant libraries, or should we be looking at neighborhood libraries? So they're very specific questions, and there were so many questions that the city wanted to ask. We said, it's reasonable for you all to go through all these permutations because that's what we pay you to do. But for a public providing input, a member of Lincoln, why don't we give them hopefully about 20 minutes? So we take a core of those questions, and anybody who goes online then gets a subset of those questions, so that they'll take about 20 minutes, and then we'll gather.
So, Mayor, the questions are specific about programs that didn't finish as high on the priority, things that might actually be cut from the budget this year?
It is directed towards those things. You know, one thing I want to say about the survey, though, in a perfect world, I would, and people would have that survey be perfect. Ask all the questions, ask all the options, and do it in a scientific way so that we knew for sure it predicted the public reaction. But to do that costs lots and lots of money. And so we've used techniques that are not perfect, but are way better than doing nothing at all. And I hope and it's a compromise between expense and the benefit of getting the public input. So I want people to know that we've gone way further in this direction of getting public input than any administration in the past. But at the same time, people need to know that it's not a perfect instrument. But we did try to be as relevant as we possibly could be with respect to the decisions that are coming up in next year's budget discussions. And to that end, we've included questions about swimming pools, about library hours, The library question, for example, asks whether you want to close libraries, or you want to increase taxes for libraries, or you would like to raise fees for libraries, or maybe you want to close all the libraries for a certain number of hours. It presents a number of options that we have as policymakers, and it puts the public in the position of the policymaker.
That's very interesting. We're about 10 days into the survey at this point. It's been
Yes.
online for about 10 days. More than 1,000 people have actually finished the survey, and some of the feedback we've gotten is they wanted more choices. Some
Yeah.
folks, for instance, wanted to take money from the Antelope Valley project to fund some of these things, but that's not a realistic choice in that particular case, is it?
No, I mean, there are some things that, again, there's a need for so much background information that you simply can't supply it in a 20-minute survey. With regard to Antelope Valley, for example, almost all that funding comes from the federal government. And what we're talking about is how do we cut back on property taxes and sales taxes, the general fund budget that is funded by those tax sources. And so it doesn't do us any good to talk about Antelope Valley, because that's federal funding that we have and that we'll continue to spend for that project.
It is a very complex budget, as those of us who have worked with it know. Another question, for instance, where someone wanted a different option was on the pools. We didn't give them an option of increasing admission fees, and of course, if we had been able to provide a lot of background, they would have found out that to cover the cost of those neighborhood pools, the fees would have had to have been doubled. Then attendance would go down, and you're back to square one in terms of the revenue issues. So some of it gets very complicated. So I hope as people go through this, I'm sure you hope as well that they will that we've given them enough background to make the choices that we've given.
Yeah. We'll see how they react to the survey. If they like giving this input and think it's useful, we'll continue it and do more of it, and maybe invest money in doing more scientific surveys. And we'll just have to see whether they think it's a useful process.
Now, last year, as part of Priority Lincoln, one of the components was what's called a scientific survey. That's the survey where there's a random selection of people chosen, yes, and then you can extrapolate from there on what the larger population thinks. Why did we not do one of the more scientific surveys this year?
Well, if I may, I don't think that what we're doing isn't scientific this year, and I think that it's easy to confuse a sampling technique when, in this case, it's open, and last year we selected who would answer the telephone, and we didn't select them by name, but what we did is worked with the Bureau of Sociological Research at the university, who used a sampling procedure, and they contacted over 600 people to get their input on a static list of questions. What that process allowed us to do was make an inference with plus or minus 4% confidence that this represented what the Lincolnites, the 250,000 residents of Lincoln, think about these issues. So the questions were just as scientific or just as unscientific this year, because again, we asked questions that were designed to provide input to the city on issues that they were concerned with. In that case, it was the program priorities. Here it's looking at specific programs and the trade-offs that are involved. So this year, in order to do that, if we had done that, and that costs certainly over tens of thousands of dollars, because it cost a lot to draw that sample and then work down that sample. In a perfect world, we would have gotten the first 600 people who were on our random list. And we said, oh boy, we're really confident this represents everybody in Lincoln. If we were to do that now with so many questions, so if we were to cut this down, we would probably have to have maybe 10 different surveys, each of 20 minutes length of, let's say we wanted 600 people so that we could have an error margin of ±4 on any estimate of what the public thinks about, say, a library trade-off or a pool trade-off. And that may have easily run up well exceeding $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 just for the survey itself. So really, any community that's doing this public input is making a strategic cost-benefit analysis of what is it we want to learn, what is it that we want to use this information for. Do we want to make an inference that to everybody in the community, or might we say, well, lobbyists are a select group, the citizens who come to public meetings are a select group, the citizens who respond to the survey are a select group. When you talk, Mayor, about wanting to broaden that net to include people you haven't heard from before, that does this. It doesn't allow us to tell you about inferences of what the average Lincolnite feels about this, but we can tell you that those people motivated to respond to this is what they feel like. And we can tell you that in a very scientific way. We can tell you the mean feelings and that standard deviation or the range of feelings. And that's pretty useful information just to know. For example, what you may find, like what we found with safety and security last year, and I talk about last year because those are data I have, those are data I know. And so even though we have 1,000 people who have responded, we've just kind of skimmed, we peek at the data just because we're curious, but this could change in the next week and a half that we have the survey online. But last year what we saw is safety and security had a high mean, but it had a small standard deviation. What that meant was that people were pretty consistent in rating this high. Other areas like economic, I think it was economic opportunity was the question, you saw a mean that was not that much lower than safety and security, but a wide or a large standard deviation, which meant that some of us in the community thought that's what the city should do, and others of us in the community said, please don't go there. Environmental was the same way. For some, it was maybe the second highest after safety and security, address environmental or address health. Most of the questions outside of safety and security had large standard deviations or a variety of opinions around the mean, that is the average of what Lincolnites think. We're going to be able to tell you about this not in terms of what Lincolnites think, but we are going to be able to tell you what a very large number of people in the community think. I mean, when I tell people around, as I said, this is going on nationally, when I tell people that last year, I think it was 1,200 people did the online, and overall in the variety of engagement activities that were conducted, nearly 2,000 people contributed their input. People are saying, geez, we only get 200 in our public engagement. How do you get that? Well, I think Lincolnites, for better or worse, and I think what I've learned in the last 2 years is I don't think I would like to sit in your seat. I don't think everybody thinks they own we at the university, we know everybody thinks they own the university. We all think we own the mayor. We all think we own the governor. We have an ownership society here in Nebraska, and we really feel like we own that. But so we have a variety of opinions that we are willing to express, whether it's a survey or it sounds like people are already contacting you and saying, hey city, how come you didn't do this on the survey? Other communities don't have that kind of passionate engagement that we have here. I think that's really great if you're a political scientist thinking about citizen engagement. Probably not so good if you're trying to go out and enjoy a dinner with your wife in Lincoln. I bet a lot of us come up to you and say, hey Mayor, I just want to tell you, please.
Yeah, you know, that doesn't bother me. I think it is a strength of our city and our society that people are engaged. And it's really apathy that kills us, not engagement.
Well,
so
we've got 1,000 people already. We had 2,000 last year. Hopefully this kind of interview will spur those people who haven't already taken the survey to go on. We are giving you paper copies, so for those people who don't want to go online, we're trying to make it accessible. And I guess we'll talk about more about that later.
Right, we'll have all the information about how you can access the survey a little bit later. But this year, in addition to opening it up to more people, it also provides us with an educational tool as well, because there is that background information that's included.
Well, it does, and I've heard some interesting feedback already in the sense that those people who have taken the time to take the survey then go down to their coffee shop and sit around talking to 10 or 15 people in their coffee group and bring up the survey and bring up the questions in the survey and start to generate a community discussion about the issues. And so maybe for every one person who takes the survey, there are a dozen or so who are going to hear about the survey and start talking about the items in the survey from those who did take the survey. And by that means, hopefully we increase or gain an additional measure of education on all of the issues that will be involved in the budget.
Alan, one of the concerns is that certain groups, certain interest groups will try to manipulate the survey in some way. What is your organization doing to try to prevent that, or to catch that if it happens?
We'll do a couple of different techniques. One is as we statistically analyze the results, we'll also look for protocols or surveys that are the same. We will examine that. There are ways that you clean any data. This, by the way, is not peculiar to, say, a public input process. It's something that even a telephone survey, that is the respondent telling the interviewer what she or he thinks that they want to hear. Or have people, like last year we announced if somebody calls you, I remember, Mayor, we asked you, and you were very gracious, you said if somebody calls you from the university, if you see that 472 number, please accept the call. Well, it's also possible in the scientific survey that people talk about. They said, hey, Alan, if you get a call from the university, be sure to tell them safety and security is your highest priority. This can happen all the time, so we are used to this. We will have statistical and other more pedestrian techniques to look at this. And so, again, you talk about non-perfect worlds. We're not perfect, but we're fairly savvy about being able to ferret this out. The other thing is, you'd really, by the time you get to 1,000, you'd have to be really, really motivated to tip that data, because we just have so many input points. And again, we can cross tabs the kind of information that we get and from where we get it and things like that. So a variety of techniques that we'll be able to do by looking at the data, by looking at the data sources, by just examining it, and then actually you get a feel for these data. And that's the art to the science, where you say, geez, I wonder whether this is, and often what it is has been mistakes that I've made in the surveys, and you say, you know, I asked that question the wrong way if I had to do it again. So lots of times you look at the outcomes, you just look at the protocols, and these are just then lists of numbers of what people do, and you're taking a look at that to find that variation that I was talking about. So we will clean the data, as they call it, and that's not cook the data, that's clean the data and just make sure that things are right, and for the paper ones that we've coded right. The great thing about the online survey is the data goes right from the respondent into the database, and there's no coding error. And when we do it, we know there's coding error, and that's another thing, you know, that you get used to looking at in a survey, is the fact that the person who took the paper version and put it into the data file made a mistake, or they're off one. Those things happen. We're trained to correct for it. So this is not anything that any social scientist trained in survey methodology is not trained to do.
And one of the most interesting aspects of Priority Lincoln last year was the all-day meeting that we had. We recruited some of the folks who had taken the scientific telephone survey and brought them in for a day, and all the directors were there. They heard information. We quizzed them some more. I just found that to be really fascinating, and I'm sure you did too a year ago. This year we're doing something similar as well on May 16th. Tell us what will happen on that day.
Okay. Like last year, we will bring together residents. Last year about 50 or so came. This year we're hoping triple that number, and that's all about we can accommodate. We're going to try and accommodate as many people who want to come. But we have a discussion set for May 16th on the East Campus of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and it will take place. It'll start at 8:30, it'll go till 3:30, 4. So it's a long day where we ask people to really drill down on these issues, and we will look at the budgeting trade-offs that we've mentioned. We will look at these performance measures that you're interested in and we're interested in knowing about, and ask the residents who are willing to talk amongst one another. And I think that engagement also, it's one thing for me to take a survey at my leisure. You know, I might do it at 11 o'clock and just kind of go through and say, okay, here's my reaction. It's another thing where I have to tell you, okay, this is what I think the trade-off ought to be, and here's my rationale, because I want you to understand my passions, my interests, etc. That's what these discussions allow. And so you might say, have you thought of? It's much more dynamic than the survey. And so what we heard last year, we came around in the fall and we asked the mayor, the chief of staff, the department managers, others who were involved, and we said, or department heads, we said, what of the different public engagement techniques we used in Priority Lincoln were most useful to you in thinking about this? And some said, I know some of the city council members were very enthusiastic about the telephone survey. Some people said, you know, I really liked hearing the questions that people asked at that deliberation or that discussion. I liked listening into the groups. I would just go and listen for a few minutes, and I really learned a lot about what people are thinking, and I hadn't thought about it that way, or I hadn't realized that people, when I'm doing it, I'm thinking it is understood this way, but that's not what 3 or 4 people around the table, that's not how they were understanding it. That helps me think about priorities, it helps me think about performance measures, it helps me think about budgeting and actually just doing my job better. This kind of investment in people's time is something that's sort of cutting edge. So this, I mentioned to you that we're doing this as part of the PBS's By the People, and that's where we learned of this technique. So they're doing it here and there around the country. They're doing it here and there for input into cities and strategic planning, courts, legislatures for strategic planning, and we're able to do it here. One of the things is that is a more expensive set of activities, and I know some people are concerned because we're paying people $35, and that's we're paying, not the city is paying.
That's
and people
coming from the Sloan Foundation.
Yeah, people may be interested. We very much like doing this, so we approached the Alfred Sloan Foundation and we said, you know, you're a leader in helping municipalities think about using public input strategically for policy making. They've been doing it for years. They do it in New York. The state of Washington was one of the first, the governor of Washington was one of the first to do it on a statewide basis, but a lot of municipalities are doing it around the country. They were very enthused about what Lincoln had done, that they had used 5 different public engagement types, and we asked them to help us fund, and not help us, to fund the activities that were going to take place this year, and they did that. And then we had to tell our funders why we were asking them to pay $35. And they said, why do you want $35? And we said, we think one of the limitations of this discussion technique around the country is that it precludes those people in the community who have to pay for daycare, who have to pay for transportation. it offsets their costs. Sometimes it doesn't cover all those costs, but we've been using that to try and ensure that these kinds of processes are open to everyone in the community. We learned that from this national group, and we've been adopting it as a best practice. So that's why $35. We thought it was reasonable. We wished we could do 75, tell you the truth, because when we're asking all-day events, the best practice is 75. Sloan didn't have a budget. It also seemed too much for Nebraska. We're a more modest community, and maybe in New York they pay $75, maybe in Washington they pay $75. In Nebraska we'll make do with 35, and Sloan agreed to fund that portion, which actually is a lot of the budget. If you multiply out 35 times, I think we are up to 175 that we can do 150. We've budgeted it for.
Now, Mayor, the survey goes till May 15th, and then we're going to do the big discussion on the 16th. How will you use the results once they are compiled?
Well, obviously we'll look at the results, and then those results will be part of further discussions with the directors, with the city council, with all of the people who are normally involved with the budget process. And we'll make some fundamental decisions relating to, first of all, the general reliance upon additional revenues versus making cuts. That's a big dividing line, obviously. And then with respect to the cuts that we make, that information will definitely be taken into account in making those choices.
But you won't be using those results solely. It still comes down to the judgment of folks like you who are elected to do this kind of thing.
Well, it does, and you know, the public is simply not able to be fully informed on all of the factors that are involved in all of these decisions. And really, that's what I like about the all-day thing. When you have the online survey, you supply people with a certain level of knowledge, and you get their reaction given that level of knowledge. Then when you do the one-day thing that goes all day long, it's fewer number of people, but you get to see how they react, having even more knowledge about the specifics of situations. And you can begin to tell whether your online survey moves in one direction or another, probably based on people's reaction to the more in-depth education that they get on the issues. But even at that, even with that all-day seminar, they're getting only a small percentage of the information that's fed to myself and department people and the city council on these issues. So obviously people have to rely upon us for judgments in these matters also.
All right, well, hopefully we have piqued people's interest here today and they're ready to go online and take the survey. We want to give you the city website address. The Taking Charge survey is available on the homepage of the city website at lincoln.ne.gov. Now, paper copies also are available at the mayor's office and at the city libraries. And also, you can request a copy by calling the mayor's office at 441-7511. Again, if you'd like a paper copy of the survey, we'll mail one out to you at 441-7511. Just give that number a call. We hope you'll also consider signing up for the May 16th discussion. There is a part in the survey that asks if you are willing to participate in that. That discussion, again, is 8:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., and that's going to be at UNL's East Campus Union. And we want to give you one more website number and another website address and phone number. For more information on the entire project, you can also call the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center. Their number is 472-5678, and the website is ppc.nebraska.edu. Thank you both very much for joining us. Hopefully we'll set a new record on the number of people we get to take the survey this year. So, and I know we're all
Let's hope so. I think we're getting there.
We're all looking forward to seeing the results as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, when we come back, we'll tell you about plans for the annual Juneteenth celebration. Stay with us.